Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Matt, Senior Client Success Manager for White House Custom Color, and we are honored to be hanging out with Dan Westergren, and I'm not going to mess this up, Dan. You're a National Geographic photography expert and freelance commercial photographer.
That's it.
I got it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, sure. Glad to be here.
I had the opportunity to chat with you a little bit at the tail end of last week and learn a little bit about you, but even from the couple hours we've spent today, I've learned so much more, so I'm really excited to get into this.
Oh, it's fun.
So, since we have a little bit of knowledge about you, most likely the people that are watching along don't really have much. Can you tell us a little bit more about you, some of your background to begin with?
Yeah. So I started in photography with in newspapers. So I have a master's degree in journalism, and I worked as a newspaper photographer for about 6 or 7 years. And then I got the dream job of being a photo editor for National Geographic's children's magazine, National Geographic World.
Okay.
And then that turned into being director of photography for National Geographic Traveler magazine. And so I worked on staff as a head of the photo editors for Traveler magazine and as a photographer for about 25 years.
Wow.
And then as National Geographic blossomed and moved into things like we would teach photography seminars, so I've spoken to tens of thousands of people teaching them photography, and now I go on some of the National Geographic expedition trips as a photography expert to help the guests who are interested in photography make as good pictures as they can.
That's awesome. And your home base, or where you live, is in?
Arlington, Virginia,
Okay.
which is right across the river from Washington, D.C., which is where National Geographic is headquartered.
Fantastic.
So that's why I live there.
Awesome. So I love how this story kind of begins and why you're here and how you came to be at White House today. So last year, you were a photographic expert on a National Geographic cruise.
Yeah.
Well,
it was Antarctica,
okay,
South Georgia Island,
Okay.
and the Falkland Islands.
Okay. And there was a gentleman on board by the name of Mike Hanline.
Yeah.
And you guys were on board for, in your words, 3 weeks.
3 weeks.
And then you noticed this other gentleman who happened to be Mike carrying around a Fuji GFX camera.
Yeah, same as mine.
Same as yours.
Yeah.
And then the discussion began, and then Mike mentioned that he had a little photo lab in Minnesota.
Yeah, I was walking with Mike, and I said, and I've always been intrigued, having grown up in central Illinois. You know, the Twin Cities was one of those places. Oh, it'd be great to go to the Twin Cities. And I was just curious. I said, how did you end up in the Twin Cities? I really like it up there. And he said, oh, I have a little photo lab. And I just turned straight to him and said, you're not White House Custom Color, are you? And he said, yes, matter of fact, I am.
That's awesome. I love how that starts. So just from a personal aspect, getting to know you and your story and looking at your website and images, one of the questions that I had when I first looked through your website before we even spoke was how you have these interactions with some of the people in your photography. Landscape I can understand. Wildlife I can understand, but when you have a human being and you're close to them, you're not using a telephoto lens, you're using a 50 millimeter, something that's close. How do you gain that rapport with those people?
I could be snarky and just say, do you want a picture or not?
Probably wouldn't work very well.
Yeah, no, I mean, how bad do you want the picture? What are you willing to do? But really the truth is, when my photography journey started, in like a lot of kids in junior high school, and some science teacher introduced you to the darkroom and you fell in love. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, well, what can I do with this? And I went to journalism school, and I worked in newspapers, and I was, I guess you could call a photojournalist. And even when I ended up working at National Geographic and we started to do some stories that were purely landscape, it was really weird, because if you ask me, I thought that a camera was something you use to take pictures of people. The thought that you would go take a landscape photo, it just didn't really, that's just not what I did. Mm-hmm. Now, National Geographic is a little bit of that, a little bit of people, a little bit of landscape, and it sort of brought the stuff together. And so I think if you look at my photographs, most of my photographs are people in an interesting situation, like right. Maybe people that usually belong there. If you want to take a picture of somebody standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, that's fine, and you can make a really beautiful photograph, mm-hmm. But why is that person standing right. there,
Right.
there's a picture in my portfolio of the Grand Canyon. And it is at a spot called Point. And that came about because I was doing a story for Arizona Tourism, and they were asking me, we were planning 10 places throughout Arizona to get a picture of. And it was, you don't just get in your car and drive around Arizona and hope you find a picture. You're going to very specific places.
Right.
And I said, well, what about the Grand Canyon? And their response was, well, the Grand Canyon sells itself. We don't market the Grand Canyon. So no. Well, I had never been to the Grand Canyon, and I really wanted to go.
Yeah.
And so I had planned a little trip of my own that if I finished early one afternoon, I had a note card in the glove compartment of a rental car, exactly where to go, exactly where to park, exactly what trail to take. And I could do it and get there before sunset. Mm-hmm. And I got to that spot, and there's nobody there. And the sun, it's like 5 p.m., and all you can see is orange highlights and black shadows. And it's the most dreadful thing. I was like, how does anybody ever take a picture of the Grand Canyon? And then the sun went down. And all of a sudden the canyon started to glow. That's nice, but I don't want just a picture of a ditch.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden here come the people that decided that they were going to start at the edge of the canyon and walk all the way to the bottom and get all the way back up in one day. And so this young lady came up, and she's coming up out of the depths of the canyon, and she stood there in that position to let her boyfriend take her picture. And it was just the exact spot that I wanted somebody. Mm-hmm. So I had a small conversation with them. I said, I'm here doing a story for Arizona about the regions. Could you please do me a favor? Just stand there and don't move. Stand as still as you possibly can. Because by that time, the exposure was lens wide open and probably like an 8 to 10 second exposure.
Oh, wow. So stand still for a long time.
Yes. Yeah. And then that's how you take a picture of the Grand Canyon. Now, that one, she belonged there because she had just had this experience. And I can tell you that she had an experience. And of course, later on, I got the picture. I had her email. I sent it off to her. I said, wow, thanks. You really helped me that afternoon. Yeah. Here's your picture. Yeah. You want to give back a little bit too. But it could have been anybody standing there, and it wasn't. So when you're traveling to a different place, a lot of what I've done in the past is to go to specific locations, like in the Canadian Maritimes, Prince Edward Island. Study the different things there are to do there. Try to find people that are associated with that place. Mm-hmm. So I want to photograph lobster fishermen. And so I find Joey's lobster fishery. And he lets me go out with him at 5 a.m. and I get a picture of him kissing a lobster because he's showing off for the camera. Or, and a lot of the times you let one person lead you to the next. So Joey kisses the lobster, and then I ask him, hey, who else do you know around here? Mm-hmm. Who should I talk to tell me more about Prince Edward Island? Right. And he might mention that I should go see this musician, a guy who, I can't remember his name, but he plays in all the little clubs in Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia. And he's like Mr. Music Man of Prince Edward Island. And then he told me about these two sisters that own a coffee shop whose sons are musicians. And so a photographer's day is usually you wake up before the sun rises, you go out looking for something to photograph in the great light. Mm-hmm. Well, by 9, 10 a.m., you're really hungry and it's breakfast time, and what are you going to do? Exactly. So I would choose a place like these sisters' coffee shop to go to the same day, so they would get used to seeing me, and maybe I would just get a coffee or start a conversation. Maybe something they say gets me thinking about something.
Right.
And in the case of, there's a picture behind us with, right there.
Yep.
And
this guy.
That guy.
Yep.
Captain Emmert Court. So I was talking to the sisters at the coffee shop, and they just said, well, have you met Captain Court? And I said, well, no, who's Captain Court? Oh, he's about 98 years old, and he's an old sea captain, and he loves to have his picture taken. He's really famous around here. People like to visit him. I said, well, how can I find him? And they point across the parking lot, and she said, he lives in that house right there. And so then is when it starts. And no matter how many years I've done this, there's like introverted Dan sitting on this shoulder, and Dan who wants to get his pictures published on this shoulder.
Right.
And introverted Dan is just like, oh, that's nice. You should sit here and maybe he'll come out. And the other Dan says, you idiot, go talk to him.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, maybe I'll do that tomorrow. It's raining today. No, go now. You really had to force yourself to go do this.
Right.
So I go up and I knock on the door. And I hear a dog scrabbling on the floor and a little bit of growling. And nobody comes to the door. And so I knock again. Nobody comes to the door. Oh, well, I guess it didn't work. Mm-hmm. So I go back to my car. It is raining. I'm sitting in the car looking out the windshield, and about 15 minutes later, trying to figure out, okay, looking at my maps, where am I going to go next? And about 15 minutes later, a young lady who happened to look exactly like Miley Cyrus came walking out of that cabin, and she's walking across the parking lot. And once again, the little battle starts. Go talk to her, Dan. No, I'm not going to do that. That's annoying. She's going to think I'm some creepy old guy. Go talk to her. So I get out of the car, I walked up and I said, hi, my name is Dan. I'm here working on a photography project, and that was me knocking on your door. Mm-hmm. And she said, oh yeah, Grandpa was eating breakfast. We didn't want to open the door because we're in the middle of breakfast. But I said, well, the ladies at the coffee shop said that I should meet your grandpa. And she said, yeah, I'm just going to the post office. I'll be right back. Meet me on the front porch. And so we go inside. I meet this German Shepherd who was like scrabbling at the door, and Captain Cord is sitting there, and he came and he sat on his porch. And he obviously knows what he looks like. Right. And he put his little hat on for me. And it wasn't a great photo situation with lighting because he's underneath the porch, so his face is actually a little bit in the shadow. Yeah. And all I could do is line up the photo to have the lighthouse. It's actually a fake lighthouse, but the lighthouse in the background to give it a sense of place. And so if you could sum up my landscape photography, this is a term we use all the time. We call it sense of place, but it's what does the place look like? What does it feel like to be there? How can you capture a picture that brings those two things together? And for me, it's about bringing the people that live there into the place and making it show in a photograph. Right. And it worked fine. And then since you guys are a photo printing lab, we need to talk about post-processing. And so with this picture, it's actually very simple. I just drew an ellipse around his face with a radial gradient mask and darkened the rest of the picture to make it look like there's a spotlight coming in. And it's very simple. It was not a sophisticated mask at all, no pen tool or anything like that. I just put a spot of light in front of him. Yeah. And with a portrait, I do that. It's like I like to be subtle. I don't want to use an excuse of, oh, I don't want to Photoshop my pictures because I want them to be pure. But sometimes you just need to make the picture look professional, look good.
Well, what I love about this, and just to kind of go back and recap what you just said so eloquently, what I love about that, and this is one specifically we talked about, you can look at that image and it leaves an impact on you, and you know the story without ever knowing the story, or you can guess at the story. Yeah. And from my perspective, I was pretty darn close, except for I thought that maybe you just kind of stumbled across this person. You didn't actually have to.
And that never happens.
Right. But the introvert extrovert, I think a lot of photographers are very introverted. Yeah. And to go out and to push yourself to do something like that, it's hard. Yeah. But that piece of equipment that you hold in your hand it's a good guard.
It is. I hide behind it. I mean, I'm very. I tell people that when I was if I'm at a party or something, I would be happier to go stand in the corner facing the wall than to actually talk to people. Yeah. But I love the power of humans in photography. I've done, back years ago, I did hundreds of weddings photographing. I photograph portraits now. I love capturing people's images on film. Mm-hmm. And it takes going out of yourself to do that. Right. And then, you go back home and you collapse for a couple hours. Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, you sit very quietly.
Yeah.
And let that energy come
yeah,
back.
and the camera really, helps me
Yeah.
bring. And now I also will say that I was not lucky for many years to work for National Geographic, and you go into the field with the camera, and the stakes are really high.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't come back and say, oh, I drove all over the Black Hills and I never saw anything. No, it's your job to find something.
Right.
And it's not to find and set up a picture. It's to get yourself into positions where something might be happening.
Right. Yeah. And that's really cool. What you just said, putting yourself into the place where it's probable.
Yeah.
That's going to happen. And maybe this would be a really good point before I have a really good way to segment into the next spot here. But the story that you were telling at lunch about this awesome image of the penguins behind us.
Yeah.
And when I was looking at that, and you referred to it, you said it's the image of the penguin coming at you. It looks like he's angry.
Yeah.
And he does. He looks like he's mad.
Yeah.
And it's probably just his little face. But if you would share that story with us, because that's really cool too, because you did exactly that. You noticed something, you put yourself in that position, but what specifically did you do that day?
Yeah, so on that day, this was a place where we went in the South Shetland Islands, and it's a popular place to take your cruise, your ship guests. I work as an expert for National Geographic Expeditions, which is a partnership with Lindblad Expeditions, and they have expedition ships that have somewhere between anywhere between 60 and 140 guests, but usually there's about 100 guests on board. Okay. And it's our job to help teach them about the natural history of an area, and in my case, how to take pictures. Yeah. So we go to the South Shetland Islands, and it was at the end of the season, which means the chicks are almost full size. So that's a penguin chick that is only about 9 months old, and it's time to leave the nest. Mm-hmm. And when we got there one week, the adults were there. It was really stinky because once they come ashore in October, then they just stay in the same place for months until February or March. Yep. And they poo a lot and it gets really stinky. So then we came back a week later and the island was full of penguin chicks and not an adult penguin in sight, none anywhere. And they were hungry. And they wanted to be fed, and they were coming up and chewing on our pants and biting our boots. And they were like, "Hey, adults, feed us." And it was like an amazing thing to see. Yeah. And I realized it's like when a baby bird that can fly fledges and leaves the nest for the first time, jumps off the cliff for the first time, it has to learn to fly. Yeah. And with the penguins, they have to learn to swim and go out into the ocean on their own because they're going to leave and not come back until October. And so I noticed that these young chicks were running up and down the water line, like frantic and confused and mad, and not doing anything. And I, you don't want to go chasing penguins to try and get a picture of them. But I realized if I just sat down in the water right at the edge of the surf, mm-hmm. they're going to run right into me. Right. And so that's the other thing. And I learned this about, I've done a few projects, believe it or not, photojournalistic projects with an 8x10 view camera. And it's the same thing that you can see into the future, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, any situation, like where people are likely going to be. Yeah. So if you wanted to photograph a wedding, a cake cutting with an 8x10 camera, you could never do that. Mm-hmm. But it's like they're dancing now. In a half hour, they're going to go cut the cake. Right. So you go set your 8x10 camera, and you wait. And I love that, finding a situation where something might happen. Right. Yeah. And put yourself there and wait for it to happen. And maybe it didn't, but lots of times it does. Right. That's awesome. I love it's so intentional, in thinking ahead and planning for that. And this is a really good way for us to segue into the next part here. With how you're approaching the intentionalness, if that's a word, of what you're doing with your landscape, with your portraits, with all the things. If you look at the opposite of that now, and people carrying around phones, and it's such a commodity of just take a million pictures, leave them on the cloud, leave them on my phone, but there's no intent to it. There's no thought about what you're capturing on that. And I know print and having tangible things is very, very important to you in your personal life, in your business,
in the images that you're creating. Speak a little bit about that, about how you're encouraging people, on the cruises. We'll talk about your book project here in a little bit, so we'll set that to the side for now. But how are you relaying that to people, that it's so important to get those memories off of an electronic object and onto your wall?
Yeah, it's something, especially lately, that, how many, my archive is a mess. It's just like piles and piles of hard drives. And they're organized within themselves, but it's not, how many, you lose these pictures that if a hard drive could crash, or, what's worse is most of it have all these important photos on our phone, and you drop your phone someday and lose it, and they're all gone. And so it's really important to make these prints.
Yes.
My mom not only inspires me to be outgoing and meet strangers, because that's what she's so good at doing. She has these albums from the 1930s.
Oh, wow.
Which you open them up, and there's a picture of her as a 3-year-old riding a tricycle. Now, how am I ever, 60 years from now, is somebody going to find a picture of my daughter riding a tricycle? Because where was it, on some hard drive somewhere? I don't know. It may as well not exist, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
And so as we get older, it becomes more important to make prints.
Absolutely.
Now, here's the hard part. What are you going to make a print of? And I went through a lot of this. My wife and I decided that we have lots. She's an art teacher, and so we have artworks all over the walls. And I thought, well, certainly I must have some photographs, all these places I've been, and shooting pictures for the magazine that, and it was really hard to find something that I thought would make a big print on the wall. As much as I love a picture like this one of a fjord on South Georgia Island, it leaves me a little bit cold. I want a little something extra to it. But most of my magazine or journalistic work had some very specific person in the picture for a specific reason. And when it came down to say, oh, here's my 100 favorite photos, could I maybe make, I didn't want to print any of them. I thought, well, why would I put that on the wall? And I realized there's a different kind of photograph to put on the wall, or a different way of thinking. The one that really broke the ice for me was back when I was using an 8x10 camera a lot. I took a picture of my son and daughter and my nephew in a hot tub in the Outer Banks on 8x10. And I thought, well, it's not a pretty picture, but it really is a big reminder of this time in our lives.
Right.
And now they're in their 20s, so to print a picture of them when they were 5 years old, that was kind of cool. And so at the time, I wanted a big print. I didn't want to spend a lot of money on it. And so I ordered from White House Custom Color a canvas unmounted. It's 6 feet by 5 feet. And I just put grommets in the corners and drywall screws into the plaster. And there it is.
Yeah.
And it makes such
Just very simple, very raw.
It makes such a statement. And it's in black and white.
Yep.
And then, of course, it was 8x10 film, so you can read every tiny little thing in the picture.
Yeah.
But then I thought, okay, there are no rules about what you print to put on the wall. There's just what is interesting. What are you interested in right now? And I still go through it. We have a wall at home that has 12 thumbtacks, and it's made to hold 24 by 36 inch photos. And so I want to see if something's going to work on the wall. I get it printed.
Yeah.
I hold it onto those thumbtacks with magnets, and you let it sit there for a few months.
Yeah.
And you think, did that work?
And let it grow on you.
Yeah, and there's some pictures right now. There's pictures from Lexington, Kentucky horse country. Some out of focus picture of a horse running by.
Yeah.
It's technically it's a terrible photograph. But when you walk in the room, you think, oh,
yeah,
look, a running horse. And I don't need to say, oh, well, it's a running horse at Lexington, at the world's most famous horse racing track. No, it doesn't. It's an object moving through space.
Right.
And so that's what I'm thinking about a lot lately. What can you put on the wall when you're taking pictures, thinking about what am I going to do with this picture? Early in my career, it was easy. It's like, well, I need to make it look good on a double truck because I want them to choose a big photo for that opening page.
Right.
And that might work to print on the wall, but maybe not. There's no rules.
Right. And You said that perfectly, and we're going to keep digging into that a little bit more with these images right here.
Yeah.
But before I pull these up, let's talk about the roadblock that people potentially put between printing for the wall or photographing because they say they don't have a good enough camera. They don't have a great lens. They don't have this. They don't have that. How are you coaching people through that when you're on the ship or in your life?
You know, okay, on the top of your camera, there's these settings. And one is like, and if you watch YouTube videos, they say, oh, if you're not a pro, if you don't shoot manual. I use that one, like that thing that says P, that's for professional.
Is that what that means, Dan?
Yeah. No, it means program. And I use aperture preferred. It's like, but none of that matters. Mm-hmm. Is it an interesting photograph? People get really worked up about, they think that there's some magic setting on their camera that could make them a good photographer. If they could only get the exposure just right. Yeah. And so much.
Or if I only had that lens.
Yeah, and this thing or that or whatever. Yep. It's just think about the end result and how are you going to get there. Now, sometimes your camera forces that end result. Mm-hmm. And I have taken a step back. I always have worked in a couple formats. If you look on my website, you'll notice that I'm a Rolleiflex geek because that's what my logo is. Mm-hmm. And that camera, for me, the twin lens reflex, non-interchangeable lens camera, shoots 120 film. Yeah. You can't change the lens. So that means you have to find some other way to make the picture interesting.
Correct.
I do coach people that obviously we're all going to use zoom lenses because they're a more affordable way to get a range of focal lengths. Okay. But you really need to think about, right now, I'm going to take a 35 millimeter focal length picture. Set that zoom and leave it there for a while. Resist the temptation to zoom in and zoom out. Mm-hmm. And that comes from a really specific place because back in the days of magazine photography, all the photojournalists or magazine photographers, they all had to have the 20 to 35 millimeter Nikon lens. Then Canon had a 20 to 35, and then it was 18 to 35, then it was 17 to 35. It was like an arms race. And when I'm sitting in my office in Washington, D.C., looking at their pictures, because National Geographic photographers would shoot all their film and then I get to see it before they do. Okay. And I'm looking through the photos and I could see them put on that wide angle lens. And I could see it start zooming out. And I'm just like, no, don't do it, because it's destroying the composition. Yeah. There's one photographer that worked for us a lot, and he was shot in medium format, so it kind of had a separate little look. But he would say he always goes out into the field with these wide-angle lenses, and he says it always looks brilliant when you're looking through your camera with a 17 millimeter equivalent lens. And he's like, I get back and look at the pictures, it's all crap. Because it includes everything. Mm-hmm. Why not include everything? And some of the best photographs are including just a little slice out. I mean, I fight that a lot, even though I claim to be reformed about not using too wide angle lenses. It's hard to fight the urge to include it all. Mm-hmm. These things I'm talking about, field of view, what you see, what you decide to put into that, it has nothing to do with whether you have the latest mirrorless camera or all this kind of stuff.
Right.
Any camera will do.
I'm going to hold these up, a few of them here so Connor can zoom in on them. But as we were looking through this stack, and I believe there's 6 of them here that you chose as your favorites, you put them in order to talk about. So talk about this one a little bit, about what you were describing at, the penguin and everything.
I mean, this one is really specific because what are you taking a picture of? And in this case, it's this glacier, which is, it's kind of ominous because it's right there. As a matter of fact, every now and then a piece will come off of that, and then everybody has to run from the wave. And then at this time of year, all the penguins were coming. So you have this line of penguins, which makes it a real kind of an interesting thing. But what are those? What are those things in the picture? I don't know. They're just like some specks on the snow, right?
Yeah.
Okay, when a penguin turns its back to you and spreads its wings out, it's a penguin.
Right.
And so you're looking through and waiting for the moment when the subject reveals itself in a two-dimensional fashion, if we want to get fancy about that. But
right.
and so that doesn't matter what the camera is. It doesn't matter if you screwed up the exposure, because the exposure was probably wrong anyway. And
You know it's a penguin.
you know it's a penguin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this one.
So this one. This we found ourselves in Svalbard, and there was a wonderful afternoon where we got to witness, as visitors, a huge polar bear had drug a 1,000-pound bearded seal up onto shore. And then it ate, and actually the polar bear would prefer to only eat the skin, the blubber, and the fat. And so it ate as much as it could, and then it was literally drunk on ketones. And it walked away a few feet and collapsed.
Just fell asleep.
You just fell asleep.
Yeah.
Then there were 2 young polar bears, about 2 years old, that came swimming across the little bay. And it was their turn to start chewing on what this big guy had left.
Mm-hmm.
And all day long this happened. He would wake up, he would chase them off, they would go up to the ridge, he would eat, he would fall asleep again, they would come. And so at the end of the day, a videographer and I and another photographer decided that we wanted to get close to this bear without the guest, because he needed audio of crunching bones.
Which kind of makes me cringe a little bit.
Yeah, and that's why we were there. So we stopped, we shut off the motor on the Zodiac.
Mm-hmm.
And
the Zodiac is
the little inflatable boat that holds 8 people, which is how we get from one place to another in these polar regions.
Okay.
And we're in the Zodiac, and we lost radio contact with the main ship. So the driver of the Zodiac is turned around, concerned with holding his 2-way radio in just the right spot to reconnect with the boat. Mm-hmm. The meantime, the motor is off, because if the outboard motor is running, what kind of audio are you going to get of crunching bones? Not very good.
Right.
So the Zodiac drifted up against the snowbank here. And at the same moment that happened, this young bear decided that he was going to come look inside our boat.
Oh boy.
And so this, you can imagine, that camera has an effective focal length of about 35 millimeters. So that bear was right there. And then it's a double exposure, because I can only guess that I was too scared to remember to wind the camera, and I took another picture over the top of it the next day.
That's almost my favorite part of this, Dan. It's the fact that you were like, oh my gosh, I was so afraid I forgot to advance the film.
And for years, literally years, I would look at that proof sheet and think, I've screwed that picture up.
I love it.
And then to everybody I show it to, they're like, this is just an amazing picture.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, let's do one more. Talk to us about this one.
There's a better one.
Okay. Here we go.
Here you go.
Now, isn't that more fun than just looking through a hard drive?
It is, it is. This is the, I call this the White Castle Amphitheater. Mm. And so every now and then, that's one thing, is so many pictures of these icebergs and these glaciers, and everybody that's gone down there has the pictures, and they're fantastic, and how do you make it kind of slightly different?
Yeah.
And in this particular picture, what really worked is to give the picture depth. As you see, there's a last ray of light hitting this particular spot, and then it makes a reflection in the water. Mm-hmm. And so I got lucky with the lighting. And that's the same thing with a camera that you can't control any kind of exposure setting. You're stuck with what you get. You need to pay attention. And once again, what was my job that afternoon? To lead people on tours of this bay. Oh, look at the pretty icebergs. Maybe we'll see a whale. Look at the seals. We're talking to them about the natural history. But in the back of my mind, I'm looking at this iceberg all day long, watching the light change on it, and things like this. And so finally, later in the afternoon, I turned to the driver of my particular Zodiac and I said, it's time. We need to go back to that particular spot right now.
Awesome.
And you go back. And so maybe find a place where you want to take a picture, because the penguins are going to walk on this pathway at some point in the next hour, and you're going to get an interesting picture. Yeah. Or there's a place down the road from your house, a barn, that maybe someday, if the light is right, you can see it. Mm-hmm. And you're going to file that in the back of your mind. Hey, when the light looks really interesting, right. My kids, it used to be really funny, and then I got them on my side. When you're driving around, and I would be obsessed with, when a rainstorm comes in, and the clouds are heavy, and then the sunlight shines under the clouds, right. There's going to be a rainbow somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So we stop the car, get out, and where's the rainbow? Because you can tell
it's going to happen.
The lighting conditions are proper for that right now.
Yeah.
And so you become a student of light. And so maybe you're a student of interesting people. Maybe you're a student of light. Maybe you're a student of animal behavior. It's to file these things back into your mind to make an interesting photograph.
Yeah.
Now, this is what's very interesting about this is I've been working on these pictures for, well, the polar bear picture is 10 years old. This picture is like this one's 9 months old. Mm-hmm. This is the first they've ever been printed.
Isn't it awesome to see?
I've not seen these printed.
Yeah.
And I've been planning, I'm working on every now and then when I have a little bit of time, I make a book, but I didn't know, I was really curious to see how much it would hold up because it's not a high resolution, kind of thing.
And just so everybody knows too, so these are printed on our Torsion fine art paper, which is uncoated, but it's a beautiful paper. And then we also did a set on Baryta too that has a little bit of a gloss or a coating to it.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, they're awesome.
And so I thought, well, I'm lucky enough to go to these really interesting places that not everybody gets to go, and why shouldn't I try to figure out a special way that it would be my and this just makes me really happy.
Yeah, no, they're beautiful. And again, before we move on here, talking with Dan and listening to your intention and your drive to create art, not being held back by fear of rejection from a human being saying no, I don't want my photograph taken, by looking for the perfect time, thinking about that and planning for that to create art that you can print and put on your walls.
Yeah.
And I know from our discussion that two of your favorite things are metal prints and float frame prints.
Yeah.
And we actually, this afternoon, you're going to be able to watch 3 of your images come to life over at our wall display building. We're going to do a large metal for you. We're going to do a float frame piece on fine art paper, and then we're also going to do a framed piece with a black, heavy Grand Gallery frame and a black mat. And then I thought it was a black and white image, but you said it's actually a color image that's in that. But that's going to be gorgeous, and to see you watch that happen, like you're loving these, I can just tell. Like you have them all in front of you. It's like Christmas for you. So that's really cool. So before we let you go here today, I do want to talk a little bit more about your portrait side. And I'm going to move these if that's all right, because I'm going to tell you you're going to be distracted if they're laying out in front of you.
Yeah, but I have another set here. So.
Yeah, that's cheating, Dan. So you have a really cool project going with a dog and a cat rescue in Arlington.
Arlington, Virginia, where I live.
Yeah, for sure. So tell us a little bit more about that project and how that is getting started and going, and then we'll kind of get down into some of the charitable side of it and how you're using that to just print and sell product to those people.
Yeah. So I've always, at different times, I love to photograph dogs. I don't even have a dog, but
I do.
The challenge is like really, the challenge is so hard to get a good picture of a dog that when you do, you feel like, wow, I really did something today, right? And there's a picture on the wall way over there that I took. That was in Prince Edward Island too. Okay. And that was just some kids playing in the mud, making a dam, and I saw this young girl, with her dog. And I asked her, I didn't just do the photojournalistic thing and take a picture of where she was. I looked at the background. I saw this receding line of the like a little creek, and I said, she was already standing in the water, so I didn't have to. I said, could you stand right here? May I take your picture? And it's raining, so that's probably why she has her eyes shut, but it was just so cute with her dog. And I took this picture, and it might have been gone into the online story. When you take a picture of a kid like that in a place you don't know, then I had to go find her mom, and say, I did this. This is who I am. All that stuff. But then, at one point, I decided it just didn't look very good. The colors kind of stunk. What happens if I turn it into black and white? And whoa, there it was. You can make it really dark if it's in black and white because it's a white dog. And so then it pushed me to want to make more portraits of people and dog that are like that. And it's hard because you show up to somebody like, oh, I'm going to take a picture of this dog. You can't necessarily do it on command. But that's my North Star of
this project.
Right. So way too often, I go to a place called the Lost Dog Cafe, and I pick up my carry-out pizza. And on the counter was always their brochure for the Lost Dog and Cat Rescue Foundation, which sprung out of this cafe.
Okay.
And it's been going for 20 years, and they've rescued 45,000
Wow.
animals, or placed 45,000 animals in homes.
Yeah.
And it keeps going. They just stopped counting, I think, at 45,000.
That's a lot of
Yeah.
a lot of help.
And I thought, I know a lot of portrait photographers do these book projects, and it's a way to introduce yourself into a community of people that you want to make photographs.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it took a long time. It was like trying to get a picture of Captain Emmert Court. I sent an email to the marketing director. I sent an email to, it took a month or so, just like 10 emails.
Yeah.
Finally, somebody responded, and they said, we've been talking about this. That's a really good idea to do a book about Lost Dog and Cat Rescue Foundation alumni, is what they call them.
Okay.
And then we thought the idea that as a typical portrait photographer, when I do this stuff, there's a $200 sitting fee, and then you do the photo shoot, and then you sell them on the products, and you show them samples, and you hope that they buy really nice big prints for their wall.
Yep.
In this case, the $200 session fee turns into a $100 donation to the Lost Dog and Cat Rescue Foundation.
Okay.
That is their sitting fee. I schedule a photo shoot with the people that are interested in being involved in this book.
Yeah.
The original idea was to have 50 people, dogs, cats, whatever, and make a 100-page book. So each subject would get, and so what's in it for the rescue is the session fee.
Yeah.
So that's up front. There's a page, they donate straight to that. I don't touch it. And then, but I have a telephone conversation with everybody who applied to see if they really understand that this is great, we can put you in the book, but if this is not, you're going to pay $100 and get 50 digital files.
Right.
There's no pictures included. You get a chance for me to come show you the pictures. Here we have different products. Maybe you can buy some print, maybe a digital file, but it serves the Rescue Foundation because it elevates their import in the community.
Yeah.
And it introduces me to new clients, and most of them are just crazy to be involved with
Yeah.
it. The stories that people have sent me about how this rescue dog, brought their autistic kid out of their shell.
Absolutely.
It's really touching,
Yeah.
these stories. And some people are like, yeah, we have a dog, and it's been really, so promoting something like this is always a nightmare. You think, I'll just put ads on Facebook and post on Instagram, but that's also overcrowded. It's really
is.
hard to break through that way now.
It really is.
And we did some social media stuff early in the summer and got a moderate attention. And then they finally, the whole idea originally was that we would email the community of the Lost Dog and Cat Rescue Foundation,
Yep.
which is very tight-knit, and they love what these people do. And that email hit 2 weeks ago.
And you were saying you've had 100 and...
There's like 102, I think, on the Google form now.
Wow.
And I have to talk to every one of those. I have to send an email by hand to every one of those and talk to all of them. And it's taken a lot of time, but it's what I said I wanted to do, and here it is.
You're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, congratulations. That's a very reputable, very notable thing to do, and it's great. I mean, you were doing it for the benefit of the foundation, but then you're also figuring out your own business path to make it worth your time too, because your time is valuable.
Yeah. And then not to forget the book, because there's no fixed time when that's going to happen. I hope to do it like January or February. But we'll print, everybody that wants a copy of this book, they can buy a copy of this book. We will print it. It's going to imprint this Rescue Foundation in time during the year of 2025 or whatever.
Right.
It'll be a tangible object, just like these prints.
I knew you were going to get those back in your hands.
That means, that it means something now.
Yeah.
And so, I'm all wrapped up in how difficult it's going to be to photograph all these people. I don't even want to think about making the book yet.
Well, in closing here, Dan, and there's one print behind us that I've been saving till the end because I wanted to close it with this kind of like more statement and thought process from you.
Yeah.
So it happens to be the image that is directly behind you. and it is shot through your glasses. And I can't help but think, I think very deeply about, this is through your eyes. Like that image is shot through your eyes, with your eyes. Like, when you're doing something like this, how are you coming up with the inspiration? Like, at that particular moment in time, in that location, with that light, Dan decided to take his glasses off his head and create this image. Like, and that means a lot.
So we didn't talk about this much, but it comes up with the framing, because I keep telling you how much I like the float frames. Well, it's because if you go to the art museum and you see a Jackson Pollock, how is it framed? Well, it's a canvas that's wrapped around a stretcher. And then usually somebody just took some lattice and cut 45 and nailed it on the edge to hide the staples. And it's not really sophisticated, but the float frame is sort of the natural evolution of that simple style. And it blew my mind to go into a museum and to see these like $1 million+ artworks, and the way that they chose, the way that they've been framed.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time in art museums. It's the reason I'm talking about this.
Yeah.
And so this particular picture is an homage to a Magnum photographer named Larry Towell, who has a book. The Magnum photographers, who in the previous generation, where a lot of them were photojournalists, and he was the poet of the bunch. He's like he's a farmer, and he just shot his pictures and didn't make a living from photography. And he had a picture like this that I saw years ago of like his glasses with a dog. Okay. And I'm always looking at pictures. I'm looking at photo books. I'm looking not to copy things, but to look for inspiration. And so I don't know how deep you want me to get into this. That is a pair of Julbo Glacier glasses, a design from the 1930s. I had my prescription put in those glasses 20 years ago, and my prescription is very expensive, and so I don't go buy new sunglasses all the time. So my kids make fun of me for wearing these old glasses. Well, if anybody pays any attention to Facebook or Instagram, or if you walk past the ski boutique in Aspen, they're back. And the whole window will be full of those Julbo glasses. And so
now your kids are eating their words.
This is me channeling Larry Towell and having something to send to my son to say, look, your dad's not such an old fuddy-duddy after all.
I love it.
Well, and I also was just curious, like, would it work? I was squinting and I was like, oh, I wonder what happened if I tried to focus the camera through my glasses, and it's just the autofocus just did it by itself. I mean, I held them away and center point autofocus, beep, it looked right through the lens. I was kind of surprised.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, this has been fantastic. I don't know how long we've been talking, but I could talk a lot longer, but we really appreciate, your willingness to share with us today from your heart and your experience, and, thinking that you were in all of these places and experienced all of these things and know that you could probably literally talk for days about them is pretty cool. So if people want to learn more about you, Dan, what is your website? What's your Instagram? Like, where are you out on the web that people can find you?
The central hub is going to be danwestergren.com.
Okay.
And so there'll be different, that's my travel and architectural photography portfolio, and the portrait / book projects, they come and go on that site, whether things are happening or not. Okay. Instagram, I have a love-hate relationship. There's a lot of pictures.
I think a lot of people do.
There's a lot of pictures, like years worth of pictures on Instagram if you want to go look at that. I don't probably update it as much as I should, but I go through different periods of posting all the time, and then there'll be a drought for 3 months. But there's a ton of pictures up there.
Is that just Dan Westergren?
Dan Westergren.
Okay, awesome. Yep. Well, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And we're really excited to show you your wall image, or your wall art come to life this afternoon.
That'll be great.
At the other building. And we really appreciate you joining us today. We hope that you've really enjoyed hanging out with Dan. It's an honor to have you here, and we will look forward to seeing you back at the next one. Enjoy the rest of your day.